Heard me many times use the term psychophysiology. When we're speaking of psychophysiological profile, we're discussing how this discipline, psychophysiology, is the juxtaposition of awareness, emotional arousal, and performance. If we impact any one of these, we adversely set a chain of events in motion. We're going to do this proactively by looking at the performance spiral and how we can impact it. In particular, we're going to be discussing two opposite poles. Our main strategy is going to be moving him from attention into intention, from the broad external awareness to the narrow external awareness. Once we get him to intend to do something, we start him in motion, heading down the vortex. We can impose this on him rather readily, but we also need to be vigilant to protect against it, just by the very act of having a strategy that we want to impose on someone. If we have that intention, it is going to negatively set us up for being vulnerable to head down the vortex. To stay in the zone is what we're going to look at next, how we can portray this and understand what the characteristics are of being in the zone. With attention and intention, we're going to move next into the performance spiral as a strategy for combat. When we discuss the performance spiral, when we're talking about the aspects of the zone and the vortex, the upward performance spiral could be considered positive flow state, and the downward performance spiral, negative flow state. So when we talk about flow state characteristics, it's going to be polarized. We're going to be looking at a spectrum running from positive to negative flow state. We've heard about flow state in sports psychology. We understand what it is to be in flow state. We've all experienced it. Some call it even just something as banal as a runner's high. However, there are certain characteristics to flow state that we can recognize. When we experience the negative characteristics of flow state, we can use those as triggers to take our proactive strategy to put us back into the zone, which we'll talk about later. And when we feel the positive characteristics of flow state, we can use those to cement ourselves in that feeling of being on track, so we're not distracted. We're going to see that's going to be an important concept later as well. The first characteristic of flow state is a perception of control. The perception of control is very, very concrete. We feel like we know exactly and can control everything that happens. Control is one simple characteristic. It's the ability to seamlessly transition from one aspect of awareness to the next in an appropriate designation. If we have attention when we need it, it's important. If we're attending the external world when we should be working on our personal practice, look how inappropriate that is. If I'm trying to work in developing, let's say, the ligaments in I want to pull up the laxity in the ligaments in my knees, or strengthen the tendons, or I actually want to work on concentrating on maximal muscular recruitment when I'm doing strength training, I have to have an internal focus. If I don't switch from seeing something out in the world, say a squirrel jumps from one tree to the next, pretty squirrel, or hey, there's a shiny penny. If my concentration is external and then narrowed, I can't develop. I don't have a sense of control of my training. So control is the ability to transition seamlessly to the appropriate profile, psychodynamic profile that we discussed. When you need to develop a strategy, you can't have that focus of thinking of, I just have to get over that hill. I just have to make it through the next minute. If you're developing a strategy, you have to have that appropriate psychodynamic profile. So perception of control, when you feel like you're in control, it's when you've aligned your psychodynamic profile to match the physical activity, the circumstantial performance. Another characteristic of flow state is predictability or unpredictability. Your ability to predict what happens depends upon your perception of control, the appropriateness of your psychodynamic profile to the circumstantial performance. But more than that, something is predictable if you are aligning process versus product cues, or procedural versus declarative the thought processes, meaning something's predictable if you're concentrating on keeping your awareness broad and you see everything that's happening. If you see everything that's happening, you're able to act upon it. If you're attending something else, or if you're fantasizing about your personal practice, or if you have a declarative comment like, this hurts, or this sucks, once your thoughts become internal, the events that happen outside of you become very unpredictable. You feel like you don't know what's happening. You feel like you don't know what to expect. However, even though we know that the unexpected will happen, once we accept that unexpected events are going to be the condition in which we're functioning, everything does become predictable. We feel like we know what's going to happen. It's because of the focus on the process. If we look specifically at broadening our awareness and externalizing our concentration, then we know just through subtle nonverbal cues that his shoulder's starting to tense and his elbow starts to lift and his fist is starting to come. This is pre-conscious processing. It's not something that we're thinking, there goes his shoulder, there goes his elbow, there goes his wrist. Because, think about that, that is a narrow concentration. It's not broad. You can't have pre-conscious processing. You can't process everything that's going to happen if you do it consciously, cognitively. So in order for events to be predictable, you have to keep your broad external focus and allow yourself to respond to whatever events happen to be occurring. We're going to talk about this later as having soft eyes versus hard eyes. Think of climbing up the vortex. You're inside that whirlwind. And if you don't take constant process to work your way to stay in the zone, what happens? If you stop and you're in that water spout, you'll get sucked down. So think of distractions as those thoughts, feelings, and emotions that will impact performance. Anything that starts to take your focus and concentration away from the actual event is a hindrance to your performance. Now, Calvin Coolidge said that persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. That is absolutely critical to understanding distractibility and indistractability for us. If we know that unexpected events are going to happen, and we accept that. We've talked about it, we've spoken about predictability and perception and control. Distractibility is our not narrowed focus, not where we're like a laser and we're committed only to this distraction, to this intention. It's still attention, it's still broad, it's still external. However, indistractability is when we have stimuli that comes in, we don't allow it to narrow our focus. You follow me on that? It's not that we're so focused and narrow, it's that we won't permit becoming narrowed. Indistractability is something that will keep us on the upward performance spiral, and it's going to become very critical. Think of it, distract. The track that you're on, you don't want to be knocked off. That upward track in the performance spiral is what you want to stay on. Indistractability is your ability to stay in the zone. Moreover, we can impose distractibility on him. What happens when we become distracted? Well, that pause becomes a reactionary gap. Once we have our focus narrowed and we fixate on something, we start intending towards something, there goes the reactionary gap. Now we're behind the game. And we're going to talk about this in depth, but recovery time is what we're going to focus upon. In elite and professional work, whether it's winning in sport, surviving in battle, or succeeding in business, your ability to remain on course, stay the course, is what will guarantee your success. Not perfect precision. Perfect precision is not what guarantees success. What guarantees success is, like Calvin Coolidge said, persistence and determination alone. So indistractability is something we want for ourselves, and distractibility is something we can impose upon him. The longer he remains distracted, the greater the reactionary gap. So when we're distracted, we have to immediately let go of those internal thoughts, emotions, feelings, external stimuli, Anything that might just catch our attention for a moment, we have to let go. It should just register. There are specific strategies that we're going to focus upon, like for instance in visual cues, how we can align our visual attitude so that it stays indistractable. We can impose this on him. There are specific things that we can do to cause distractions on him. We spoke about somatosensory stimulation, affecting his breathing, movement, and alignment through mechanoreception, proprioception, and nociception. We can do this proactively, but this is the key to one of the key characteristics in heading him in the downward spiral and heading us upwards. Temporal distortion is a common figure we've heard in suddenly violent attacks. Any type of crisis situation will start to bend time, and that it has been such an ineffable esoteric concept that no one has that concrete. Well, sports psychology brings to combat reality and stress physiology something very important, and that's the understanding of the time warp. The time warp is the differential relationship between someone who is in the upward performance spiral and someone who's in the downward performance spiral. The relationship between the two of those people creates a time warp. Some people have called this a reactionary gap, but what does that specifically mean in particular? Let's think of this in terms of photographs. We've used the concept in our system of talking about time framing. You should have the same time framing when working with someone, when you work from soft work to hard work. Time warp. Let's say you're driving to work. This is an automatic pilot for you. You have an hour-and-a-half drive to work every day. It's usually in traffic. What happens? Your focus and concentration become internal and narrow. You're fantasizing about, that date that you're going to have on the weekend, or the movie that you're going to see, or maybe you're worried and anxious about something in the future, like a business meeting. Whatever it is, that internal and narrow focus now brings you to what? Work. All of a sudden you're there. How did you arrive there? You happen to think back and, gee, time just flew. Time flies. How often have we heard this comment? Think of driving along to work. You may have only picked up three pictures, 3 photographs along the way. Say you took a shot of the cop that was sitting there in the corner because you were driving 80 and at 55. Think about that young lady in the short skirt. Oh, just caught my attention. Driving along, see a big tree and there happens to be a bald eagle sitting on the top. That catches your attention. All of a sudden you're at work. 3 pictures. So time flies by because there's only 3 photos in the span of an hour and a half. Now, let's take that to vacation. You're touring St. Petersburg, and this is your first time in Russia. You land and you're driving through the streets of St. Petersburg and you see everything. You're devouring everything. Every sense is alive, and you're looking at the Hermitage, and you keep driving along and you're looking at the Fontanka River, and you're walking along and you see all of these beautiful people and all this rich language, all these smells going through your senses. 1,000 pictures are taking place. So the touring analogy versus the driving analogy gives the understanding that if you have 1,000 pictures, time goes very slowly. If you have 5 pictures or 3 pictures, time goes by very fast. We're going to expand on the time warp as we discuss more aspects that happen from that. Just a small graph, quickly. If we look at, say, individual A and individual B in a fight, if individual A has 3 frames in time that he perceives, and individual B has 10 frames. Now, if you look at this, the same objective time has occurred, but subjectively, the perception is, well, look at this, because of distractions, the world becomes very unpredictable. All of these events happen very quickly. Feels like there's a lack of control. Fighter B has slowed down time by becoming indistractable. So the events become very predictable because he's seeing more of what's happening than A. And because of that predictability, he feels an intense sense of control. Now, this will take us to the understanding of the difference between attention and intention. Now, we've heard of the term intentional or non-intentional striking. What does non-intentional striking mean? It's the ability to not intend to deliver specific blows. Non-intentional striking is almost an oxymoron. If I want to strike someone, if I want to throw my jab out, I have to think of my jab and launch it. Now, I could try and condition it to become second nature, but it's still going to be second to the fact that I have to register a signature of stimuli, motor launch, and access it.